So the audience for your CV, I'd like you to think carefully when you're writing, when you're constructing your CV, when you're reviewing it, when you're scrolling through, think about who's going to be reading it. Now, obviously, there is the hiring manager. In some cases, it will be a committee, as in more than one person who have the responsibility. Sometimes that's shared. So it may well be my responsibility, but yours and hers, right? Okay. So we all have to agree. So in that case, we're the hiring manager. Okay. But typically when we say hiring manager, we mean the person that's making the decision. So the CV needs to work on them, right? So usually that hiring manager, the person that's making the decision, will be sent 3, 4, 5 CVs. In some cases, they're sent way more, but typically they're going to get the final approved, right? They're going to get a selection of CVs and they'll be asked to make a decision. Sometimes that hiring manager will say, no, I want to see some more. This is not right. I want to see more CVs. Now that hiring manager may be working with HR. They're going to decide, okay, I like these CVs. I like these individuals. Let's bring them in. Bringing them in can mean physical, but often that means let's do a Teams call, a Zoom call, or the like. We want to meet them. So I'm impressed, or something on this CV, something here has caught my attention. And the shortlist, so you've got the long list of CVs that have been sent in, the shortlist, which might be 3, 10, every company has a different approach. The shortlist, we're going to interview. Right, so let's take these 3. I like this one, I like this one, I like that one. So I've got 6, but the first 3, let's interview them. And these ones look interesting, or these ones look good enough. So let me take a call with them. Sometimes the hiring manager might say, look, one of their direct reports, could you go and speak to these 3? So it may well be the hiring manager doesn't take the first interview. And then so someone who's very influential to the hiring manager will take the Zoom interview, for example. Okay. Now, it's not that simple though, right? So yes, you've got the hiring manager, okay? But usually there's a whole load of people in the process. So let's take an example of you submitting your CV to a job site. So JobServe, Indeed, those kind of ones. So you submit your CV via JobServe, let's say, and that CV will then go to an external recruiter, for example. That external recruiter, they have been given a job spec or a job specification from their client, the company, usually HR in the company. They said, yes, we want this. Sometimes it's the hiring manager or the hiring manager's team who have submitted the job description to the recruiter. Okay, so first person that is going to see your CV is usually, in this case, an external recruiter. That's someone who is non-domain expert usually, meaning they may be really into digital, or they have been doing digital hires or fintech hires or whatever, but they're just recruiting. And now what I mean by that is they know the terms, but they don't know the detail. So usually they've got some idea. If you're using some very specific terms in your CV, they've got some idea, right? So they might be a scientific recruiter, they might be a financial services recruiter, right? Now, so the first person typically you need to pass, right? You need to impress is a recruiter. And what they're doing usually is a very high level pass. They've got the job spec and they've got your CV. Now, some of them will, for example, look for keywords. They'll just say a couple of keywords, database or project management, okay? They'll be looking for some keywords, and they'll do that scan. In many cases, that recruiter, they need 5 or 6 CVs to begin with. They may be getting an avalanche. They may have had 400, 500. A lot of the time when I'm speaking to recruiters, I speak to a lot of them, right? Especially to get this perspective. A lot of the time, they're picking the CVs that come in first and going, okay, I need 4 or 5, so no. Interesting. Let me just spend a bit of time. Yes. Okay. No. So now I've got my 6. You might still be submitting, right? But if they've got their 6, those 6, for example, sent over to the client. So the recruiter is looking through your CV to take a view, right? A very quick view. This looks like a business analyst. Okay. Now, making sure your CV is formatted for that scan, for that quick glance is very important. So we'll come to that. In this process, we've been through the recruiter, okay? Your CV has made it in to HR, okay? Now, this is from a job site. because I'll take some other examples in a minute. It's made it in to HR, to the company. The next person then, the recruiter has said, look, here is 5 or 6. See what you think. Now, in reserve, they've probably got hundreds of CVs, okay? And often they'll just keep those. You won't hear a yes or no for a period of time because they are waiting to hear from their client to see do they need more or not. Now you've got an HR person in the company looking at your CV. Some of them may spend a good amount of time. At this point, sometimes your CV might actually be read. I mean that in constructive terms because often CVs are simply just scanned and famously 5 to 10 seconds. And that's often what the recruiter is doing, for that avalanche of CVs to get their first batch. We'll talk through that in more detail, the 5 to 10 second scan when we get to experience and style and layout. HR, so your CV has to be read by someone who is not an expert. They may work in IT, they may work in the biochemistry division, doesn't mean they're expert, but they need to be convinced. They're usually going to have a read because they've got 6 or 7 CVs that they've been sent a batch by the recruiter, and this is usually done online. It's not usually printed out, so they'll have a quick scan. Now that might have come through in an email. Okay, so imagine how that's going to be. What that is double click, up comes the PDF or the Word document. Often it's a PDF because the recruiter has converted it into PDF. One of the first things an external recruiter usually does is take off all of your contact information. Make sure your contact information on your CV is easily removable. That's why I do like it at the top. The recruiter is taking the contact information off for a number of reasons, one of them being so the client has to go through them and can't come to you direct, right? So that they get paid. Now, HR, typically double clicking, bringing up the CV. Sometimes there might be a portal or a system they're using, but often they're just double clicking on the CV. Up it comes, and then they'll, this is their job, so they'll often be reading through half. If I'm being a little naughty, maybe with half attention, right? Not maybe full attention. Some of them will sit, right, and they will read cover to cover those 6 CVs. Others will do a brief scan and go, yeah, right, because the recruiter has sent them, right, there has been a layer of checking already. So the HR will just go, yeah, this looks interesting, and that one looks interesting. Yeah. They may drop some CVs. Okay, they may go back to the recruiter and say, no, sorry, those 6, no, send me some more. Okay, that's why the recruiter's holding them. Okay. Because often they're saying, what do you think? Is this what we're thinking? So this whole process is happening, right? When after you submitted your CV. HR then says, okay, happy with these 5, 6, or 10, or whatever their process. They all have different policies, right? Let's send this to the hiring manager. Me, for example, okay? So in come the CVs. Now, I might be in a meeting. I'm usually stressed a lot. Right, very, very busy. There's usually often so many demands being made of you, depending on the position you're in. So you'll be in a meeting and no one's speaking to you, and you'll see the email come in, and it's interesting, it's exciting, because you want to go, oh, business analyst's role, let's have a look. And then you're double clicking, and then you're having a look. Okay, double clicking. Again, it's usually been sent an email. Okay, some companies use systems, and we'll get to that, but typically it's been sent in an email. Double click. Oh yeah, double click. Oh yeah. Right, scanning. So it's how does your CV look? Okay, remember your contact details have been taken off, generally speaking. Maybe the name has been left on, right? But often contact details are off. Scan, yeah, interesting. Okay. And then comes the Control F on Windows, as in forward. What are they doing with this? Sometimes they're sending that off to their team. What do you think, guys? So BCC or CCCC, what do you think? Okay, because I'm saying, like, I'm busy, I've got a lot going on, and actually I do want your opinion, or they're going to be in your team, right? I'm hiring them, but they're going to be in your team. Forward, what do you think? Okay, so now you've got a whole load more people going, okay, right. At this point, they're scanning, but they're reading, okay? Because now it's getting serious. And there's only 6 of them. Okay, so you want to make sure the CV is ready for that scan. Okay, so it looks good, that looks credible, this is interesting, this is worthy of more time. And then these hiring individuals, influencers, the hiring manager and then the influencers, they're looking through. Some of them will read with diligence, right? But a lot will scan. Okay. And then they're going to go back to the hiring manager and say, we like this one and this one. We like Bob and Jane. Okay. Or they all look good. Or none of them. Yeah, we would say no. And then, of course, I have to go, well, I like the one from Netflix or whatever popped out. I mean, I might challenge. Okay. But typically speaking, we might start this whole process again, back to HR. Nope, not happy. Send me more. Recruiter, okay, here we go. Worst case, the recruiter reposts the job with some updates, right? Because we've got it wrong, or typically we've got it wrong, but we'll often blame the recruiter, right? Okay, so there's one process, right? One process. Now, yes, the next step would be we like the CV, we like these three, let's get them in, okay? But I wanted to look at it from a different point of view, because understanding how your CV is being processed through the company is really important when it comes to what language are you going to use? How are you going to describe yourself? Because if we're not thinking about this process, it's very challenging to then get that context for how we're going to write the CV. So I've taken you through the job site, okay, through an external recruiter and so on. Now, sometimes it may well be, by the way, another option is you don't submit your CV, you're approached on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a whole other section we should get to. I need to do another course on LinkedIn because there's a lot to get to there. But often the recruiter will approach you directly, especially when you've got some experience and you're in role. They'll approach you directly and say, would you be interested in blah, blah, blah. And that results in you then eventually sending your CV typically to them. And that process then begins again. Okay, but it's not been submitted. It's been requested and retrieved by the recruiter. The other approach is going direct to the company, and that's where you've seen a job on LinkedIn or on one of the job sites, or you have specifically gone directly to their careers page because you want to work there, or someone, however, you found the job and you're using their system. Now, there is a lot of concern, especially when we've been talking on TikTok about application tracking systems and the application systems that companies are using, and then the AI. Now, in some cases, a lot of those systems that you're submitting your CV to are using some kind of AI scanning. We'll come to that. Let's set that aside, because the majority of systems that you are submitting your CV to, especially if they are old, creaking HR systems by very old technology companies, and you'll still see many of these in use today by some of the biggest companies, there is no AI scanning. There is none of this, right? It's an upload system, essentially. Okay, it's an upload and processing system, but unless it's an ultra modern system you're using, you can be quite assured that there's no AI happening. They may use AI later on in the process, okay? But so you're at the careers page, you find the job, you say yes, apply, then you've got to register, go through that process, okay? Now you submit your CV. So file, select, upload. Some of it you're rekeying, which is quite annoying, into the upload system. But then you press submit. Okay, now what's happening? Okay, this is a key aspect here, because sometimes it's a 24-year-old intern. So someone who's new into role, and they're tasked with going through the 400, the 5,000 or whatever CVs that have been submitted. Okay, now there are bulk tools, bulk options to say, format by, select all, essentially, we don't want them, we do want these, right, from a kind of bulk management approach. But I wanted to highlight, sometimes when you're submitting directly to the company, you're often you don't know what HR approach is being used. So you submit your CV, who's reading it first? Now, I want you to make sure that you're thinking about that very nice, very eager 24-year-old, i.e. very junior HR that has been tasked. It's not their responsibility, it's their responsibility, right? But they said, have a look and, cut it down to 500. Now, if that's happening, that is an example. If that's happening, this is another reason why we want to make your CV as clear as possible, okay? Because yes, we can assume that some HR will be reading it who have domain knowledge. Make sure that you are not removed by the junior or the individual who just, they're very new, they don't know, right? So if your CV isn't coming across in the right way for those junior individuals who might be looking through, right, and making the initial yes or no, then you're going to be a no. Often when I'm taking people through CV format and words and phrases, they're thinking, this is ridiculous. It's going straight to the... Wait, no. It's not going straight to the hiring manager. It's going through a process. So worst case is you've got someone very junior who doesn't know, and they might not know the companies that you've been working for. They might not have that domain experience. Okay, so in many cases you have to explain. Okay, so let's assume you've submitted it into the company system. The individual has then gone, yes, right? They've done a scan. It's typically digital only. They're not printing them out, okay? So they'll be scrolling up and down. Usually it's converted to PDF. Sometimes it's Word, depending on how old or creaking the system is. So they have to kind of download and then look at it. But usually it's converted into PDF and then they can just see it on screen. But next point is they're looking at it here. Right, they're looking at the top, the first bit, right? They're looking at the first page. So what's your first page look like? Can they be bothered to scroll? Are they going to scroll, right? We don't know what kind of formatting they're going to do in terms of saying, we don't want anyone from this university. Most companies are very, very open on their diverse policy, and they mean it. But we are diverse. We want people from different backgrounds, different universities, different courses. But when you've got thousands of CVs coming in, you've got to start selecting somehow, right? So sometimes you just won't make the cut. Depending on whatever background, whatever thing you've been selecting, you just won't make the cut. But let's put our best foot forward. That junior HR, okay, or the first HR person that comes to look at your CV goes, yes, we like this, okay? And in some cases, I've had it where my team, we have been given 110 CVs, right? There's been hundreds more, but the 110 have come through that HR process where they said, yes. And what they're doing is, as a service to us, they're going, look, these guys could be. So over to you. So they could be, like, they pass our criteria. What do you think? So we then, on our system, we're getting notifications from the system and email saying, oh, you've got new CVs to have a look at. Sometimes, again, it's a hiring manager that will be doing that, but often that's delegated, or that is the responsibility of someone in the team, a chief of staff, or someone whose job is to go and look at those CVs. Sometimes we'll give access to the team, right, to all the heads or these individuals or my management partner, the person that's helping me, my chief of staff or my executive assistant, etc. Right, they'll all get access. They'll have a look, and we'll try and take from those 110. We'll try and pick out ones that we really like. We'll start starring them. We'll be having a look and going, well, we like this one, like that one, like this one. So why I'm doing this here is just making sure that you're understanding a process, right? These are typical. Now and again, when I'm talking this through on TikTok Live, we'll have someone from HR will be in the room going, oh no, it doesn't work that way. Right? Yeah, I know, right? Every company is slightly different, but generally speaking, this is how things are working. So you've got the job site approach where you're going through a recruiter. Either the recruiter is reaching out to you and getting your CV, or it's been submitted, you've submitted it via job site, or it's coming direct into the company, right? And so they've got your CV and then it's going through this process. So be aware there's multiple steps. Now, it could be 5 individuals, 5 people before it gets to the hiring manager. It could be 2 steps. It could, in some cases, if it's a small company or if the hiring manager has said, get out of the way to the HR, there might just be 1 step, right? You submit, and then the hiring manager, am saying, I want access. Now, often, I would say to HR, look, I don't want you getting in the way here, right? We will look. So we want to see everything. You send, just make sure you give everything, send in everything, okay? Don't remove anything, because sometimes I've had it where an individual that I would like to hire, but we have to do it the right way. So I've said, please submit your CV. Please submit your CV. Yes, please. Right, but we have to do it the right way, and we will look at everybody's CV. So we'll evaluate your CV with everybody else's, but you're certainly a favourite. We'd love you to apply. They apply, and then I don't see the CV. And that's because they were removed over here, because the HR thought, oh, they're not relevant. but actually I've pre-said they are relevant, right? I want to see their CV. So in some cases, I'm going to want to see all of it, because HR are people focused, as in people issue focused. Sometimes I'm concerned that they might remove individuals from this process that I actually would like to see. Often I'll say, no, show me everything. Show me everything. And sometimes, and quite often, I have actually sat 7 p.m. till 9 p.m. going, next, because I want to make sure that we're getting access to the best people. And it can be very frustrating when I've got hundreds of CVs and no one that's really, no one that I was hoping for. And that then creates quite a bit of tension between me and the HR. So there's some high level approaches on how the CV gets in, right? And then the audience for your CV. Now, I realize I've been quite detailed there. I just want to make sure you've got those pictures in mind, okay? So when it comes to audience, we've talked through the hiring manager, okay? We've talked through the HR, but I want to highlight as well, your CV sometimes is going all the way. Now, by all the way, I mean to the CEO, to the divisional director, to the senior manager, right? Or however the organization is structured. So your CV needs to work for them as well. Yes, we need to make sure you're going in the door and you're getting in the door and you're getting approved and so on, right? But at the same time, we also need to make sure that if someone senior is reading this and it's someone who doesn't know the detail, someone who doesn't know anything about your qualification or the 3 things you did at this company that mean you're a genius, a super genius, right? How does the senior individual, how do they interpret your CV as well? So we've got to think about all of these different approaches, because sometimes it's going straight into the hiring manager, as I say, through a few hoops, but other times it will be distributed. Sometimes, yes, it is my decision, but through convention or request, I've got to send those 3 CVs that I'm really, really keen on to the CEO, or I have to send it to the divisional director or to somebody else. We've got to make sure that everything you've got in the CV, the way you're formatted, the way the language you're using and so on, is going to work for all of those different parties. Sometimes I see it where the CV is brilliant for the hiring manager. And you think, great, but then it doesn't get through that hoop, doesn't get through this hoop. And then after the hiring manager, it creates concern in the other processes as well. So please bear in mind that depending on the type of role you're applying for, and sometimes it may surprise you, sometimes junior roles are going through this whole process, right? Up to the divisional director. In some cases where there may be a hiring freeze. Often hiring freeze mean generally we're not hiring, but we need to hire for this role we are replacing or whatever. Some cases for a hiring freeze, yes, your junior CV is going straight to the top, or the top of the department or division. So we've got to make sure that your CV is formatted for them as well. Okay, there we go. Now let's move on.